In the quiet, unsuspecting corners of the world, monsters wear the faces of those we trust most: family, friends, and neighbors. Beneath their smiles, darkness festers, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. These are the stories of unimaginable horror, where the hands of those we once loved become stained with blood, and the line between sanity and madness is shattered. Each tale is a descent into the mind of a killer, where fear is not only felt but hunted. Welcome to the twisted realm of murderers, where survival is never guaranteed, and every shadow hides a potential threat. When I was about 10 or 11, my mother planned a weekend trip to France. She had been excited about it all week, but when Friday night came, I was still sitting on the couch in the living room, tablet in hand, feeling confused. She had gone without me. Maybe it was an oversight. She was always busy, rushing from place to place, her mind racing faster than her body could keep up. Home alone, I passed the time playing games on my tablet, trying not to feel left out. The evening felt strange in a way I couldn't quite explain, but I attributed it to the dusk and the creeping isolation. As the darkness swallowed the house, every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind through the windows made me more anxious. Suddenly, the headlights of a car cut through the dense darkness, illuminating my window with a cold, ghostly light. Startled, I looked out but didn't recognize the car. It wasn't my mother's. My heart started to race. Two men stepped out of the car. Both were dressed head to toe in black, their faces obscured by low-slung baseball caps. I backed away from the window, my breath catching in my throat. Who were they? Why were they here? I peered through the sheer curtains, my hands shaking as I gripped the fabric. The men moved with terrifying purpose, heading straight for the front door. I crouched behind the sofa, my heart pounding in my ears. I froze, caught between my instinct to hide and the gnawing fear that they might know I was inside. The sound of a fist pounding on the door echoed throughout the house, shaking me to the core. I bit my lip to keep from screaming. The men said nothing, just banged. Their silence was more terrifying than anything they could have said. Then the banging moved to the window, loud, violent banging that shook the glass in the frame. I crouched down, afraid they might see me. The figures were so close I could hear their labored breathing between each knock. They moved methodically, as if they were checking every weak spot in the house, every entry point. In desperation, I grabbed my tablet and began recording through the cracks between the blinds. My shaking hands could barely hold the device, but I managed to capture a few seconds of the men still banging, still silent before they suddenly stopped. I dared to look outside again. The men were walking back to their car, their movements slow, almost deliberate, as if they knew I was watching. I expected them to drive away, but instead the car remained in the driveway. The men just sat inside, waiting, staring at the house. An unbearable tension filled the air, making me choke with fear. Minutes passed. Then, as suddenly as they had arrived, the car sped away, disappearing into the night. I thought it was all over, but I was wrong. As time passed, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was still being watched. I checked every window, every door, but everything seemed safe. Exhausted, I collapsed onto the bed, turning on the bedroom light to make myself more comfortable. And then I woke to a scratching sound, soft, insistent, as if something was scratching at the walls from inside the house. I froze. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at the same time, growing louder with each passing second. I reached for my tablet, hoping to record whatever was making the noise. But as soon as I pressed the record button, the sound stopped. The silence was deafening. Then, without warning, the power went out. The house was plunged into total darkness, save for the faint moonlight shining through the windows. My heart pounded as I fumbled for my flashlight, the light flickering faintly as I swept it across the room. The walls seemed to close in, the deep darkness forming strange shapes, twisting and crawling. Suddenly, I saw a face in the window. Not a man's face, but something much worse. Sunken eyes, too large and too empty, stared at me, and its mouth contorted into a grotesque smile moved, though no sound came out. It was as if the night itself had taken shape, pressing against the glass, eager to get inside. I screamed, backing into the corner. But when I blinked, the face was gone, as if it had never been there. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. I sat in the corner, clutching the flashlight, waiting for anything to happen. but nothing happened. The next morning, the power was back on, and my mother came home, completely clueless as to what had happened. I showed her the video I'd taken of the men in their car, but she dismissed it as a joke, a misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew our house had been targeted by someone. Sarah, an 11-year-old girl, nervously stood at the front door of her home, watching her mother drive away for a quick appointment. She had never been home alone before, and the house felt too large, too quiet. After locking the doors her mom instructed, she texted, "Doors locked." Her mother responded, "Good job, sweetie. I'll be back soon." But only moments later, Sarah heard a faint creak coming from upstairs. Her heart began to race. She grabbed her phone, typing with shaking fingers, "Oh my God, Mom, someone is in one house." Her mom quickly replied, "It's probably just the wind or the cat, honey. There's no one there." Sarah wanted to believe her, but the uneasy feeling wouldn't go away. Suddenly, she heard slow, deliberate footsteps coming down the stairs. Frozen in fear, she sent another text, "Mom, I'm serious. Someone's coming downstairs." This time, there was no reply. Sarah panicked. She could hear the footsteps growing closer, each one heavier than the last. Whoever was in the house was no longer trying to hide. Realizing she had to act, Sarah's instincts kicked in. She quietly tiptoed toward the back door, praying it wasn't locked. But just as she reached for the doorknob, she heard a chilling voice from behind her. "Where do you think you're going, Sarah?" the voice whispered. Her blood turned to ice. She didn't turn around. Instead, she flung open the door and bolted into the backyard, her heart pounding in her chest. The cool air hit her face as she sprinted toward the fence. She was only a few feet away from freedom when she heard the sound of fast footsteps behind her, gaining speed. She leapt toward the fence, but her hands slipped on the wet wood. Desperately, she tried again, pulling herself up just enough to see over the top. She could feel the adrenaline coursing through her body, but it wasn't fast enough. A hand grabbed her ankle, yanking her down to the ground. She kicked and screamed, but her voice was muffled by the darkness surrounding her. The figure pulled her closer, tightening their grip as she struggled to escape. Sarah's eyes darted around, looking for anything that could help her. There was nothing but silence and shadows. Meanwhile, Sarah's mother was speeding home, her heart in her throat. She had called the police, but she couldn't wait. She had to save her daughter. When she finally arrived at the house, everything looked eerily calm. The door was open, swaying slightly in the wind. She rushed inside, screaming Sarah's name, but there was no answer. Her eyes scanned the empty living room before she ran out to the backyard. There, near the fence, she found Sarah's shoe lying in the grass. Her heart sank. The police arrived moments later, but it was too late. There were no signs of a struggle, no clues left behind. Sarah was gone. The last thing her mother saw was a message on Sarah's phone, still flashing on the screen, "You'll never see her again." Days turned into weeks, but there was no trace of Sarah. The house that had once been filled with laughter now stood empty, haunted by the memory of her desperate attempt to escape. The nightmare never ended, leaving her family broken, consumed by the horror of that day. It was a chilly autumn evening, and 18-year-old Emily found herself alone for the first time in her family's old countryside house. Her parents had left for a week-long business trip, leaving her in charge. The creaks and groans of the house were unsettling, but Emily was determined to prove she could handle it. The first few nights were uneventful, filled with Netflix marathons and texting her friends. But as the week progressed, the feeling of being watched began to grow stronger. Shadows seemed to stretch longer, and the silence of the house felt heavier. On the final night before her parents' return, Emily woke up in the dead of night to the soft tapping of rain against the window. Groggy, she stumbled out of bed to get some water from the kitchen. As she reached the living room, she stopped dead in her tracks. All the electronics, TV, gaming consoles, speakers were piled haphazardly on the couch. Her heart raced. "Maybe I forgot to put them back after cleaning," she reasoned, though deep down she knew something was wrong. As she walked into the kitchen, she noticed the back door slightly ajar, the window wide open, and the screen missing. Her blood ran cold. Someone had been in her house. Panic set in, but she tried to remain calm. Maybe it was just a prank by her siblings. She reached for her phone to call them, but before she could dial, A faint sound came from upstairs footsteps. Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't call anyone, there was no time. She grabbed the nearest object, a kitchen knife, and slowly made her way up the stairs, the creaking floorboards betraying her every step. The hallway stretched before her, the shadows seeming to dance along the walls. The sound of footsteps grew louder. She paused outside her bedroom door. It was slightly ajar, just enough for her to see the corner of her bed. Suddenly, the door swung open, revealing a tall figure cloaked in darkness. Emily screamed, but before she could react, the figure lunged towards her. She swung the knife wildly, the blade missing by mere inches as the figure grabbed her wrist, forcing her to the ground. Desperately, she kicked and struggled, but the intruder was too strong. Just when she thought it was over, a loud crash echoed from downstairs. The figure hesitated, loosening their grip for just a second, but it was all Emily needed. She pushed them off and scrambled to her feet, bolting down the stairs. To her shock, standing in the living room was her father, holding a baseball bat. "Emily," he yelled, rushing towards her. "Are you okay?" Tears of relief flooded her eyes as she collapsed into his arms. The police arrived moments later, arresting the intruder who had tried to escape through the kitchen. In the aftermath, Emily learned the intruder had been a notorious burglar in the area, targeting homes when people were away. He hadn't expected her to be there, but something in her instinct had kept her safe. As the sun rose the next morning, casting warm light over the house, Emily sat with her parents, grateful to be alive. Though the night had been terrifying, it had ended with her family safe and the intruder behind bars.